Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to Unspoken Rules from Mutters to Mutters, Inspiring Journeys of Engineering Alums. My name is Jeanette Martinez from the Office of Career Services. Today we have Andrea Zavala, class of 2021, and Ben Stanfield, class of 2008, who will talk to us about their experiences as working professionals with an engineering background. Our moderator today will be HMC student Niall Phillips. We will take questions at the end of the event, but please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to get as many as we can if there is time. Without further ado, Niall, the mic is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeanette. Hi, everybody. I'm Niall. I'm a senior computer science and math major here at MUD. And so to just jump right in as an introduction for each of our panelists, can you share your name, a little bit about you, like your major at MUD, what you do now, and anything else you see as appropriate? So, Andrea, do you want to start us off?
Sounds great. Thank you, Niall. So, hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Zavala. I graduated a class of 2021 as an engineering major, and my concentration in HSA was in art, which I hold close to my heart. And now I'm working in industry. I'm a systems engineer for a satellite program at Northrop Grumman. So, my specialty has kind of become modeling and simulation, but I am just a few years out of college, so we'll see where it takes me.
And
Awesome.
oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, Ben, go ahead. Thank you.
I'm Ben Stanfield, class of 2008. I was also an engineering major. I'm currently a senior hazardous substances engineer for the Department of Toxic Substances Control at California Environmental Protection Agency. That took longer to say than I think I've had to do it before. Um, Prior to that, for 14 years, I was an engineer with Arcadis, a global design and consultancy firm, primarily working on hazardous waste cleanups.
Awesome. Thank you guys for those introductions. So we'll get right into our questions. We have a few questions listed out that we want to get through. So to start us off with kind of a basic, obvious one, why did you choose your major at Harvey Mudd? Did you have this career or a certain career in mind? And just what led you to make that decision? Andrea, you can go ahead and start us off with this one.
Sounds good. So I came into Harvey Mudd with a pretty open mind, but I think I knew I wanted to do engineering. My ultimate goal was to work in the aerospace industry. I had my sights set on that since I was in late high school and went to space camp, as one does. So I was kind of enamored with the industry as, being driven by curiosity, exploration, just really cutting edge technology, very collaborative. Honestly, a lot of the things that drew me to Mud also drew me to aerospace. But you can even be a doctor and work in aerospace. But engineering was kind of just seemed like the right fit for me. I really liked team projects, really liked hands-on learning. And yeah, I ended up committing pretty early, and the rest is history.
Awesome. Thank you. Ben.
I was nowhere near as decisive. I think I started at Mudd wanting to be a chemistry major, and sometime in the middle of Frosh Chem decided that was not for me. Also, sometime around junior, senior year, decided I didn't want to go to grad school. Luckily, engineering meant I didn't have to go to grad school. And so that was my engineering, kind of why I chose the major. It also seemed the most general and open, which let me delay making real decisions later, which was good for me as well. That's the funny story. An equally real story is coming out of Baby STEMs, which was the engineering class that everyone had to take when I was there at school. That was the first time that I felt like I could really walk out of a class and say something meaningful about how things happen in the real world in some ways. And that was really exciting for me and really got me kind of jazzed and was, the part where I was like, yeah, I really do want to be an engineer because this lets me describe the world around me and come up with new ways to interact with it. And I thought that was really cool. As far as doing environmental cleanups, I sort of stumbled into it. It is probably what I had wanted to do. My HumSoc concentration was environmental economics. For a while, I thought that what I wanted to do, which was doing the waste cleanups, just wasn't something that could happen. I did a couple internships and said, well, this isn't nearly as much fun as I thought it would be. And then landed a job that I took because it seemed more interesting than law school. And if a year later I could switch, and have stuck with it now for 15, 16 years.
Awesome, thank you. Ben, I wanna stick with you here. You mentioned you had a lot of experience prior to your current role at
Mhm.
another company, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Can you describe that journey you took from your graduation back in 2008 up to your current role now and some pivotal moments that you could identify along the way?
sure. So for 14 years, I was a consultant, working for kind of a global design consultancy firm. Actually got started at a smaller firm that then got bought by a larger firm that then bought some other larger firms. And whereas, in 2008, when I graduated, I was working for a 500-person company, mostly in California. By the time I left, I was working for a 30,000-person company based out of the Netherlands that, was all over the world, right? Um, One of the things that for me, really thinking about for my current role is I switched actually from working for a consulting firm to now I work for the state, working for California. And that was a bit of a transition, a bit of a shift. Was a bit of a pay cut. But one of the things that's been nice is working, in only one time zone, has been really helpful for me, especially as I started to have kids and kind of reprioritized where I was spending my time. Uh, Definitely loved consulting, got to do a lot of cool things, but found myself waking up to East Coast problems, working on West Coast problems. And then I had a team in India working for me. And since I don't explain things very well, we'd want to talk at 9:30 at night, so I could tell them what I was actually hoping they do overnight for me the next day. And while that was a lot of fun, that was also a lot of work, and it was hard to turn off. And as my wife will describe me, I'm not very good at setting boundaries until I'm really good at setting one big boundary and left to work someplace else. Um, so that was not an easy decision to make. I'm a little bit weird in that I worked someplace for 14 years right out of college and didn't really jump around much. Um, I felt like I was able to, with that large consulting firm, kind of able to reinvent what I wanted to do. I found that I've got an attention span about 3 or 4 years long. And once I get to that kind of need to do something that's a little different, and is able to find those opportunities within that one firm. And I do not remember what question you actually asked me to answer, but I feel like I've maybe done a little bit of that. But yeah, that's kind of me. Every couple years, just really trying to figure out what am I really trying to do? What do I want to do for the next 2 to 3 years? I found that 5-year plans were a little hard for me because usually 5 years in, I was in a totally different place than I thought I would be. Um, but 2, 3 year plans are pretty good. And at some point you hit a 2, 3 year plan and you say, I kind of want to do something pretty different and may, change companies or careers.
That makes sense. I think you touched on the points there and you're jumping around. So thank you for that. Andrew, I kind of want to pose this to you too. You're in a very different stage of your career, I believe still at your first company. So what was your journey like to get here? And if you can identify any pivotal moments up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my journey to get to where I am I think most notably started back in 2018. I was a sophomore at Mudd, and I had gone on the Society of Women Engineers conference trip. It was in Minneapolis that year, and I interviewed with Northrop Grumman, my current company there, and was offered an internship that would take me to Huntsville, Alabama for the summer. And I'm from Texas, so truth be told, I got to California as fast as I could. And when I was talking to the interviewer, I'm a sophomore. I really haven't taken many classes. And she asked me if I had any preference for where to work. And I said, I'll go anywhere. And I got the offer with Alabama on it. So, um, it was just a summer, so I'm really glad that I said yes to that, that I took that opportunity and that I was open. And I didn't know how I would fare working for a defense contractor. Like I explained earlier, my real interest and drive was to go work in aerospace. So to me, as a 20-year-old, this was a great foot in the door, really great opportunity, and it was. So after that, I returned for a second internship with NG, and I requested to be in the aerospace sector. And the aerospace sector, fortunately, is in Southern California. And it happened to be the year that the company split aerospace into aeronautics and space. And of course, I landed in aeronautics. But again, it was just a summer internship. And so I, I bit the bullet again and I said, it's just another experience. I'll try aeronautics. I'll see, if it's a good fit or not. And I learned a lot that summer. It was fully remote this was the pandemic now. And then I ended up actually taking 6 months off after I graduated from Mudd. And I was able to live abroad and volunteer abroad. Like I mentioned, I became interested in engineering through outreach programs, Space Camp being one of them. And so, you know, that's a really big passion of mine to give back to the community. And one really great way to do that as an engineer is to work in STEM outreach. So I got to kind of go just, dive in the deep end with that before I started work full time. And the company was great. I was able to negotiate a later start date, still guaranteeing that I would have that full time job, in a contract, and that really opened up the opportunity for me to kind of build up that international opportunity for me to volunteer and just focus on that. So 6 months after I graduated, I started full time, and my plan was to go into the space sector, but an old technical mentor from my 2020 aeronautics internship tapped me on the shoulder, and she, had been a really big influence on me during my previous internship. She actually graduated from Pomona, and then went and got her PhD in physics from Caltech. So, she said, "Hey, I have some funding for you to do a space study within our team. If you are open to coming back, I know you said you wanted to work on space stuff, but I'll give you space stuff to work on." And I was really excited by that. So I returned to the company in the aeronautics sector, doing space work. And that kept me pretty busy for about 6 to 8 months. And then kind of some other assignments started trickling my way, and it was really starting to, veer my focus from satellites to planes. And there was just a point where I just would be in meetings and I would just realize like I'm totally zoned out. I'm just not interested in this stuff. So I took the initiative and I networked around the company and I found some opportunities within the space sector, and I made the transition from air to space about a year ago. So I spent one full time, as a full time employee, 1 year in aeronautics and 1 year in space.
That is super cool and complex for how recent you graduated. So that's super neat.
Yeah, lots of details in my story because I can
No,
like zoom in.
for sure.
Well, and
Um,
I just want to encourage you there too. I mean, realizing that what you were doing was not quite what you wanted to do and talking to someone about it, that's huge. I mean, I've had to do that a couple times. Sometimes I'm looking ahead and doing it. Sometimes I'm just so sick of everything and pulled my boss aside and said, like, dude, I want to quit. Let's do something different. And often was able to, but just being able to have those conversations and developing those mentor relationships, both with your immediate boss and other places in the company is huge. That's awesome, Andrea.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, like I explained, I said yes to coming back into the aeronautics sector, even though, I kind of knew that wasn't where I really wanted to end up. And I was just kind of just saying yes to things. And there was a point where I decided like, no, I have to be able to say no. And
Yeah.
even after I transitioned teams and sectors, I mean, she would still tap me on the shoulder, which is great. And I'm flattered. And, there's real value in working with a technical mentor or any mentor who sees your value. But I kind of like really had to I had to grow into that. And I'm sure I'll just keep having to practice it over the years.
Yeah.
Thank you for the call up, and I think that's a great lesson there. Um, Andrea, sticking with you here, were there any moments of personal doubt or like uncertainty along your journey? Obviously, you said you worked in a couple areas, you weren't as interested on your path to where you wanted to be. And did you receive any type of pushback or skepticism for others when you were like chasing this career path? And if so, how did you handle these situations?
Moments of doubt. I mean, I had a really hard time my first couple of years at Mud. Um, I was kind of like the classic story of coming from the top of my high school and, landing at the bottom of my freshman class. Um, so yeah, when I was a freshman at Harvey Mudd, I really doubted that I could, graduate. I really thought there's just no way I'm gonna come out of this with a degree. Like, um, and people were supportive. I wouldn't say anyone kind of like fed into that. Um, but being around upperclassmen really helped me. I was a member of Society of Professional Latinx in STEM, or SPLS, and there was a senior in that group who was an engineer, and she was really involved with the group. And so I was just around her a lot and just kind of having that role model. And I remember when she graduated, that just like made such an impact on me, and it really kind of kept me motivated um to keep going and to know that like, that I'll be able to do all the things that I need to do to get through this. Um I also remember Professor Little, I think he's retired now, but he was a core part of engineering core. He taught my E4 class, and I remember he said something once that stuck with me, still sticks with me. He said, confidence comes from competence. And that really just kind of calmed me down in a way of like, as I learn, like my confidence will grow. I don't have to be confident like right now, because I wasn't. And like, that was just my experience. And I found it to be true. And so, yeah, lots of moments of doubt along the way, kept pushing through. And then as far as my career goes, there was in that 6 to 8 month period, which I think it is pretty common for my peers, at least that I've talked with. There was kind of, I was a little bit discouraged, like, wow, this is like this is like what it's going to be like forever. Um, and I just don't know if I want to be an engineer. I don't know if I want this to be my life's work. Um, as I said, I have really diverse interests. And I think that's really common at Mud. And I think I really debated like just jumping ship. I really considered myself a flight risk, like applying to jobs, all over and all kinds of things. really like getting really, creative with where I thought I could go. And again, I leaned back on some mentors. I had some, calls with different people at my company to kind of talk about this and my different interests and how I felt like I wasn't really, you know, uh, using all of my skills at work or, engaging with all of my interests. And I started getting involved with different things. So I'm really involved with the employee resource groups at my company. We have a women's international network. There's a couple of other resource groups, employee resource groups, that I volunteer with a lot, and that, we do professional development, we do community outreach, and that kind of fills my cup in ways that my day job can't, because, I think it's very rare that anyone's work fills their cup in all of their interests. So that was something that I thought it was going to be a deal breaker for me, but I realized like no, it can also be a strength, and there's other ways to approach life. Like, yeah, I don't know, Ben, you might have some 2 cents on this too.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a huge shift coming out of Mud, where at Mud, like being a Mudder is your whole identity. And in a lot of ways, everything revolves around that, and you're with people who it all revolves around it together. So, even if you're playing Ultimate Frisbee or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, like you're still in that Mud bubble identity wise. And then you get a job and you get an apartment and you move someplace and you realize that your job is not your whole identity in a way that it felt like school was. And that's a rough transition. For me, it was age became a big realizing that wasn't my identity, because at Mud, like a senior is very different than a junior, is very different than a sophomore, is very different than a freshman. And then you go out and you're hanging out with like 30-year-olds, and it feels like you're the same person because they haven't had kids yet, or you're in a similar life stage, and you're like, I do not know how to relate to this right now. Because I kind of feel like I have things together, or some, it's just different. And there is this, it's worth putting some time and effort into. Like I think you said, Andrea, 6 months, a year out of getting out of Mud to say like, what do I actually want to do with my time, and how can I sort of motivate myself when I don't have, the graduation requirement staring me down and telling me what I should do, or just walking out I lived in Atwood, so you could walk into the little courtyard and there'd usually be something going on. You kind of had to do it I kind of had to figure out how to do it myself. And having some good relationships, having a good roommate, just volunteering for some other stuff, after school programs, church, wherever you find your people, even needing to look out and try to find those people a little bit outside of work.
Thank you. You guys are dropping gems here. So this is great. Thank you so much. Um, Ben, I want to come to you here and ask you, how have your personal values shown up in your work and in your career trajectory? You mentioned early wanting to work in like waste and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
I'm curious how that's happened. And then additionally, if there's been a time where you've had like really strong alignment or misalignment between your work and your values, how have you navigated that?
sure. I This actually comes up a ton. So just to give you a um, brief thought of how my job works and how my job works as a consultant. Like if you are a big company and you have an oil spill or a tank that leaks, or something, whatever, the government will come to you and say clean it up, and you will then hire a consultant to do the cleanup work and go talk to the government and say, look, we cleaned it up, okay. So as a consultant, you are working for the company that caused that problem, right? Like you're working for the person who released the hazardous substance, however inadvertently or 50 years ago or whatever. And you usually get into environmental consulting because you want to save the environment. And so that is a thing that you have to navigate is I am working for the people who, in college was I excited about stick it to the man, they're the polluter, let's say, and now they're paying my bills. And how do I reconcile that? And how do I say the world is a better place because I chose to engage with this problem? And though I have limits in not enough budget, not enough, internal support to get things as best as I can, me bringing my whole self to bear on this problem, makes it cleaner than it would have been if I had let someone else do it and kind of do a half-assed job on it. So I think that was a big thing for me, making that shift from like, hey, I want to save the planet and clean up, these super fun type sites to now, oh, I need the person who caused the problem to pay my bills, and I am in some ways advocating for them. To now at this point, my role is with the government agency that works with those consultants and the people who have released substances and kind of holds them accountable. So it is a thing that I think for me, having to look out or look in and say, are things better because I chose to engage with this, even if the process is sort of flawed? That's been motivating for me, because most of my interactions between those three groups, right, like the proponent, the consultant, and the regulator, we all mostly get along, but it's kind of adversarial, just by the nature of the relationship. But feeling like at the end of the day, I've been able to make the world better because I've engaged has what's kind of kept me going, even when sometimes I was put in a situation I didn't want to be in.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, Andrea, I want to shift a little bit here, because you mentioned earlier about a technical mentor you had who kept kind of coming back to you, tapping on your shoulder. Can you talk a little bit more just about how networking and relationship building in general has been beneficial for you in your career and what type of role it's played?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I really just can't emphasize it enough. I don't even have the words really probably to describe the impact that it's had. For me personally, I started this habit pretty early on, but I would just reach out to people. Um, Especially, I mean, working in, so I worked in the Office of Career Services. I used to be a peer consultant while I was there. So, um, I mean, even just my relationships within the office, I felt like had an impact on how I saw the workplace, how I saw my experience at Mud. And I kind of, um, I guess the way that Mud teaches, the interconnectedness of it all really and the importance of relationships kind of reflects how I see my answer to your question, Niall. Um, I really value when people share with me what they think. I really valued that technical mentor that I mentioned when I was debating taking time off after graduation. In one of our meetings, I went and I asked her, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about me taking 6 months off? What do you think about me taking a year off?" And I didn't take everything that she said and just make my decisions based off that, but it was valuable to hear her perspective. Um, in the OCS, we hosted a panel that featured a handful of alumni, kind of like this one. And I spoke with one of them after the panel because I really liked the way that she talked about um, work-life balance and needing to take time off from work. And I felt like I needed that before entering the workforce. So she was someone else I talked to about the idea of time off. She connected me with an engineer at some other company, and all of these people have shaped my views in some way or another, whether it's reinforcing my original beliefs that contradict theirs, or whether it's opening me up to something I hadn't thought about before. Um, I've had, mentors from formal mentorship programs. I've had mentors that have come about. Um, I see them speak on a panel and I reach out to them. Um, and anyone who is willing to share their time and perspective with me, I try to have questions for them. I try to, see what I want to learn from them so that it's not so open-ended as to where I'm just like, so, what can you teach me today? It's like, hey, I'm really thinking about how, um, you know, I want to work with students and I don't feel like I'm making an impact in my job as an individual technical contributor. What do you think? And I had a mentor who shared with me she felt the same way and she thought about quitting and becoming a teacher, and then she shared with me why she didn't. Um and there's nothing wrong with you know anyone's the way, if people want to make different decisions than you. um but it was so I find it really interesting to just hear how people, inform their decisions. Um, and I would just say, like, never be afraid of, cold messaging someone. Um, the 6 months, 5 months I spent volunteering internationally, that was with an organization that I found from a Wikipedia page, and I found their email address and I emailed them. And I spent 5 months living in Tanzania, working with them, like working for them, um, based on an email. And I just actually connected with an alumni here at Northrop Grumman who was featured in some systems engineering highlight. He graduated in class of 79 and he retired last Friday, and I got to go meet him. And I just think that's cool. It just makes the world feel smaller. It makes me feel more connected. And while he's retiring, he pointed me to another mutter that's here at Space Park where I work, who I'll be meeting with next week. So you just never know. And I also think there's a lot of value in mentoring as well. I think you can learn from mentees as well. Being early career, I do that less now than maybe when I was a senior at Mud. Um, but the time will come um, in the right, dynamics. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. I I probably just really tried to bring it home there, that I just think that mentorship relationships are so pivotal, that, networking is so important. Don't be afraid to, randomly reach out to people.
Awesome. Ben, feel free to comment on this as someone I'm sure you've menteed people or mentored people and had mentees if you have that perspective.
Both. I mean, and just constantly doing it. I love the cold call or the cold email. I did that a couple times, and sometimes you have to follow up a few times. By the third time, if you don't get a response, okay, time to move on. You probably, my rate was probably 50% of the time people were receptive, and the other 50% of the time I'm making up those numbers. But a significant amount of times you just don't hear back, and okay, go on. And yeah, just being able to say, there was one guy in my office who I just said, look, I have no idea what you do. Your job is totally different than mine. Let's get lunch and tell me what you want or what you do. And that became a really helpful mentor-mentee relationship for me. Yeah, and Andrea, like you said, sometimes the formal ones are good. Those, in my experience, have been generally helpful for what they are, but really just finding people in your circle who you can say, hey, let me talk to you about what I'm going through, what I'm thinking, that's been super valuable. I guess the other thought for me is show up to happy hours, which is kind of a weird thing to think at well, maybe something that you could actually show up to at Mud. When I first started working, I really wanted to do a good job and I wanted to get out early. So, you know, show up at work on the computer. I think we had desktops at the time, but that was pretty quick switch to laptops. I'm not quite that old. And go home at, 4, right? So 8 to 4, that's my 8 hours and I'm done. And I noticed that, these 4 guys would always stop and eat lunch in the break room every day. And after a month or two working there, I said, you know what? I'm going to stop and eat lunch in the break room where these guys are and just talk to them. And those have been some of the richer and more long lasting relationships in my life. Sounds weird to say, but we'll say career. And we all work at different places now. But we've kept in touch. I've had a couple job offers come through from that. Have had just a number of back and forth because, I made the decision to say I'm going to sit and eat lunch with these people who have 5-10 years of experience on me, and we're just going to get to know about stuff and talk about stuff. Uh, at this point now, they're sending me baseball coaching plans because I'm coaching my 7-year-old's t-ball team and have no idea what I'm doing. And their kids are a little older, but even stuff like that's been good, and it can not solely be traced back to the hey, I'm going to sit and have lunch with you guys, but a big part of it was just I'm going to find time to be where the senior people are and hang out with them.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I guess you guys have kind of hinted at this, but I'd love to hear from both of you on this. How do you seek out or create opportunities for growth in your career? Um, and I think this is something that, when you're in school, it's very easy to grow. Someone's always teaching you something new, but in your career, it's something you have to seek out. So how do you guys go about that?
So this is shifting a little bit for me. Sorry, I'm just talking because I was still on mute or unmuted. In consulting especially, there's a lot of freedom. But what I found was having that 2-3 year plan or some goals and being able to share that with your supervisor was super helpful because you'll blink and 3 years will have gone by and you're still doing the same thing you were doing before. And I saw a lot of people who just kind of didn't have a plan and figured they'd wait for someone else to tell them what to do and would grab them and lift them up into the next level. And essentially they just got pigeonholed, and people said, you feel good? Okay, great, you feel good. I'm gonna move over to this person who's kind of asking questions and raising their hands. So that's probably the most helpful thing that I saw, was that if you wanted to do a certain thing or be in a certain role, in some ways you kind of had to just start doing it, and it'd take the organization about 6 months to a year to catch up and realize you were, and you couldn't get too mad about that because it's just slow. And then also just having a plan and recognizing that it might not change tomorrow if you say, hey, I want to do this, but you can set yourself up to say, hey, over the next year or two, this is where I want to go, and getting other people to keep their eyes open for opportunities that way. That helped a lot.
Yeah, I actually just started grad school in January. So, I mean, that's my very obvious way to challenge myself to grow. Um, but I will say before I was doing grad school, I was kind of focused on finding the new position, learning stuff in my new role in the space sector. Um, and then when I was back in my first role, um, that's when I had gotten involved with the employee resource groups. Being a leader within those groups helped me build my confidence at work. It helped me network. It helped me kind of find my voice in a way and also get some exposure at the company. And, you know, needless to say, these aren't necessarily imperative to me, you know, and my technical contributions, but I think that they really help me develop as an individual, as a full person, as you know, keeping me aligned with my ultimate goals. Um, and part of that was also like, hey, I do have this other interest, you know, that might be outside of engineering eventually, you know. If I want to work in the nonprofit sector or something like that, then I'm kind of have this extracurricular right now that's kind of helping me grow those skills. Um, I will say that once I switched to space, spent 6 months here, realized that I really don't know a lot about orbital mechanics or satellites. Um, I spent some time deciding about whether I wanted to continue leading our Women's International Network or whether I wanted to start a grad school program. And I spoke to some mentors about that, and I decided to do grad school and to step down from the leadership in the within the ERG. And that decision, you know, was based on a number of factors, but I think ultimately, no matter where I go, I'll have, you know, my master's once I get it. Um, I had a hard time committing to the master's. This might be tangentially relevant, but when you get a master's, you have to commit to being more specific. And as you know, the engineering major at Harvey Mudd, we really relish in the fact that we don't have to make that kind of commitment. So I had a hard time deciding if I was going to do a master's because I didn't really know what I would study specifically. Um, and, you know, it wasn't until I switched jobs within the company and worked on this program for a bit and really liked it that I was able to say, okay, yeah, what kind of master's would really help me in this job? The other part of it that I had a hard time committing to was, you know, what good is a master's of science in aerospace outside of aerospace or outside of the US? Um, and I think at that point, that's where the mentors really helped me kind of walk through that decision for myself. And yeah, so I kind of have this idea of like my battery, which I really started thinking about a lot at Mud, because Mud will drain your battery. And you might think that it's a lot bigger than it really is. But once I got into the workforce, I had this like extra bandwidth that I, you know, could decide what to spend it on. That's where the ERGs filled that for me. And then when I decided on doing the master's program, I decided, well, something has to give. And so that's where I took some of that ERG work out of it. And I'm sure that it will just keep, you know, ebbing and flowing over the years. Yeah, that's like my main growth opportunity right now.
I do want to throw one thing out that was a revelation for me a couple years in. Um, a difference between a career and like Harvey Mudd is you've got time in your career, which is something that never didn't make sense to me until I was about 10 years in. But you figure if you graduate at 21 and you work till you're 65, you're going to work for about 44 years. And when you start your career, like you will work for twice the amount of time that you've been alive, right? So if you think of to where you are at 21 versus where you are at 0, by the time you take all of that time again, you will only be halfway done with what you will probably do in your career. So a lot of the things, and this is what I observed kind of supervising people, at 3, 4 years, things can seem kind of rough and you will be so mad that so and so got a promotion before me, or I feel like I'm stagnating. And that's important. Like we should work through it. Don't want to say that there's nothing there, but over like the 44 years that you're probably gonna be working, a lot of that comes out in the wash. And it's not worth getting too worked up over. if something suddenly takes 6 months, because at Harvey Mudd, like every 6 months, your whole life starts over because you've got new classes, you're doing something different. And so the time scales once you start working are just so much bigger and afford you the opportunity to do so many other things. It's almost paralyzing with fear when you think about it at the upfront. But it does really change your perspective when you're figuring out what do I want to do. Like you've got more time than you realize. I was freaking out when I graduated because I didn't know if I wanted to work or go to law school. And Professor Cardenas, who was, I think, the dean of faculty at the time, and also the compressible flow uh, teacher, was just like, just pick one and quit. And like, if you don't like it, just quit because it'll be a year. You'll be 22, and you can still do like anything you want. That was pretty revelatory for me because being at Harvey Mudd, I was like, I'm not a person who quits. Um, I'm going to stick with it just out of spite, if nothing else. And once you're working, like you kind of get to decide what you want to do with your life. And if you try something and it's not for you, you have all sorts of time to just do something else. And that was something I had not appreciated until she told me that.
I think that time scale you mentioned is a very good note. Like it is not all one chunk that just has to sit there and be unmoving. So I think that's a very good point. Um, okay, a couple more here. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. Um, but what do you all see for your future career paths? Do you think like you might stick with what you're doing for a really long time? Could you see yourself moving into a different role, a different industry if the opportunity provided itself? And things like that. Or if you just want to talk about like how your interests evolve and how they may continue to evolve, either one. Not to incriminate you all with your current employers or anything like that.
No worries. None of them. I think only Will is on the phone unless there's other people hiding on Zoom. So don't sell me out, Will. I don't know you, and I'm talking like I do. But anyway, I mean, I actually have a job application in for more of a managerial role at my current company. Um, it would be jumping like 3 levels of management, um, which sounds scary to say that way, but kind of becomes not normal, but I mean, once you've been around a while and seen stuff, your career kind of doesn't always go like straight up and to the right. I guess that's to the left if you're looking at me. It can zig and zag a little bit, and it can zig and zag along different dimensions, right? Going from Arcadis to DTSC, I was able to do some more technically harder work, but I also went from supervising a team of 16 to not having to supervise anyone. And that's kind of freeing in some ways. But I do actually like supervising people and mentoring folks in kind of that more official capacity. So am interested in getting back into it. Um, yeah, where am I going to be in like 10 or 15 years? I don't even know, right? I will probably be less technical. I will probably be more bureaucratic and managerial. But it's one of those things where I find that, if I'm looking too far in the future, I just have no idea because probably I'm going to be in a way different spot than I even thought I would be 3 years from now, I'll say.
I mean, you've already kind of heard about my different interests. I love what I do, which is almost like the hard part. Um, but I don't think this will be my only career. I don't think that working as an engineer in aerospace will be, what I retire doing. I would love to do international work. I would love to, at some point, work in commercial aerospace versus government contracting. Um, yeah, I would love to work somehow with community engagement, some kind of altruistic work. And it'd be really cool if all three of those categories could somehow line up. Um, but I also have gotten really comfortable with not needing to decide right now. I think, as I've described in my first year, I felt like I needed to figure it all out, and it had to be one or the other way. But getting my master's, I've kind of locked in for the next few years, and I'm really comfortable with that. I'm really comfortable with just being like the junior engineer that is learning from everyone. It's actually a really fortunate position to be in because I'm allowed to ask a lot of questions and I'm allowed to kind of not know what I'm doing, I feel like. And I'm embracing that more so now than I felt like I could when I first started.
Yeah, wherever you start, you get a couple years where nothing's your fault, which is great. Um, like coming out of Mud, I was like, I'm the smart person because I went to Harvey Mudd. I need to know stuff. And then you start working and you're like, look, you're just not going to know it. And that's fine. And you can kind of lean into that. And one of my bosses or one of my technical mentors would always give me a hard time because in meetings I would nod along and act like I knew what was going on. And then I'd frantically go back and look it all up on Wikipedia. And he was like, don't do that. Like, if you have a question, ask your question. You don't need to look smart. Like, we know you're dumb because we just hired you out of school. Um, that's fine. And there's amazing freedom in that.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Final question here. Do you have just any last words of advice to current students or, young alumni of the college, across any topic that you may think is interesting to speak on?
No. Um, no, I mean, I think my big thing is just try not to stress out so much and feel like you need to have it all figured out. Um, you've got time, you've got um, depending on the cost of tuition, you may not have money in the bank, but the degree from Harvey Mudd is money in the bank in some very real ways that can open some doors for you. And just the fact that you're at Harvey Mudd, in some ways, whether you graduate or not, um, means you can figure stuff out. When I first graduated and things felt overwhelming, one of the mantras that kept me going is that like other people have figured this out before me, and I went to Harvey Mudd, and not that that's necessarily healthy throughout life, but sometimes it was that little boost that I needed to get through, and it'll be okay, and don't stress. I guess is my only thought.
Yeah, what Ben said. Um, I would say that you don't always have to take the hardest route. I think, you know, I chose Harvey Mudd because it was the hardest school and I felt like it would make me the smartest that I could be. Um, and then I moved to Africa by myself for 5 months. And somewhere along that time, I asked myself, like, why I was putting myself through these situations that are just so hard. And that, like, does it need to be this hard to be happy or like to achieve greatness? Um, and I think I probably needed both of those experiences to kind of find my limits. And now I'm, you would never imagine that I'm the same person that I was back then. I really value my balance. I really am much better at boundaries. Um, and I think it took finding the limits to get there, but I don't think I had to necessarily go as far as I did. So I just say, like, it's okay to say no to things. It's okay to take the easy route sometimes. Um, and your life will be enriched no matter what.
Thank you so, so much. Niall, did you have something? Oh,
No, I was just gonna say thank you guys so much for those, and can pass it back to you, Jeanette.
yes. Well, thank you, Niall, for moderating our panel. And thank you, Andrea and Ben, for sharing your stories and your experiences. We truly appreciate you taking the time to tell us about your journey and all these pivotal moments that you had from Harvey Mudd to where you are now. So thank you so much from the bottom of OCS's Career Services hearts. We appreciate you and we value you, and we look forward to more future panels in the future. This recording will be uploaded to Harvey Mudd College's Career Services playlist on YouTube, and it will be available for all our community members to view. I hope that you all have a great night, and thank you so much for joining the Office of Career Services and our panelists, Andrea and Ben.